It should say school district update. And I don't know if that was in community, new board of public comments. And since we didn't have one, there's not a correction last month. But for the purposes, Chloe, of the minutes, note that a correction should be made on the agenda to change from school board update to school district update. All righty. And with that, we have as our we have a guest speaker, and I do not have what I need. Would you like to introduce our guest speaker?
Our guest speaker is Nicole Hartano. She is Roberta Winter's former intern, and Roberta Winter is the former president of the Radnor Women League of Voters. And Nicole will be presenting on domestic violence. Oh, Nicole's here. Oh, Nicole. You can come up to the podium and present. Great. Thank you.
To be a PDF here, we just want to share the screen for that person.
Thank you for having me today. My name's, is it working? Okay. Thank you for having me today. Hello, my name's Nicole Hartano, and I will be discussing domestic abuse and victim resources.
That one should always be on. That should always be on? Okay. Just point it more down towards you.
All right. Is this good? All right, sorry. So why is domestic abuse important in relation to public health? So according to the World Health Organization, health is defined as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Domestic abuse has the potential to destroy all aspects of a person's health. It is important to remember that although it may be a common misconception, domestic abuse is not just physical, but instead comes in many different forms. So what is domestic abuse? Sorry, I can't. Domestic abuse comes in a multitude of forms, and it isn't always easy to see. The types of domestic abuse are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse, coercion and threats, privilege, isolation, intimidation, minimization, denial and blame, and using children. Physical abuse is centered around the use of force or violence. If a person is being physically abused, they may experience kicking, pushing, slapping, hitting, pulling, being thrown down, biting, shoving, spitting, or the use of weapons. Sexual abuse is centered around the performance of sexual acts without consent. Acts of sexual abuse include using another for sex, taking sexual photos without permission, risking the health of a partner for the purpose of having sex with others, physically attacking sexual parts of another's body, and rape. Emotional abuse is centered around manipulation and verbal bullying. A person who is being emotionally abused will often experience being put down, humiliation, name-calling, mind games, the ruining of their self-esteem, and gaslighting. Economic abuse is centered around the controlling of money. Economic abuse entails hiding family income, making the victim ask for money, taking a victim's money, or preventing the victim from getting a job. The use of coercion and threats is a type of abuse in which an abuser will threaten violence, leaving suicide, reports to welfare. They will force the victims to drop charges or force the victim to commit crimes. The use of privilege entails an abuser treating the victim like a servant, not letting the victim make any big decisions, acting like the master, or establishing gender roles. Isolation is a form of abuse centered around controlling the victim's interactions. The abuser will control what the victim does, who they see and talk to, what they read, prevent them from having outside involvement, or try and justify abusive actions with jealousy. Intimidation is a form of abuse that entails the abuser smashing things, destroying the victim's property, instilling fear with looks, actions, or gestures, displaying weapons, or abusing pets. Minimalization, denial, and blame is a form of abuse in which the abuser will try and make light of the abuse, not take the victim seriously, tell the victim the abuse did not happen, or blame the abuse on the victim. Using children is a type of abuse in which the abuser will use the victim's children to relay messages, create guilt surrounding the children, turn visitation into harassment opportunities, involve the victim's children in arguments, or threaten to take away the children from the victim. It's important that victims of domestic abuse know that they are not alone and can seek help at any time. Here I will talk about essential resources in which are only a fraction of good people willing to help. They are the Radnor Township Police, Radnor Township Social Worker, the Domestic Abuse Project, and the Women's Resource Center. The first important resource worth discussing is the Radnor Township Police, where an interview was conducted with Superintendent Flanagan. At the Radnor Police, they help victims in many ways, such as receiving 911 calls, which is the first and most important step if a victim is seeking help, documenting victims once they disclose abuse, evaluate cases of abuse, and determine a course of action. They have a community support unit, complete with a social worker who helps evaluate the case. They ensure that every victim knows their rights. They complete a lethality assessment, which helps conclude how deadly an abusive household is, and they will give that assessment to the Domestic Abuse Project. They also give victims an informational packet detailing further action as well as necessary forms required to take a case farther. Some important takeaways from the interview with Superintendent Flanagan were that domestic abuse can involve any family member, not just a romantic partner. Additionally, commonality in regards to domestic abuse cases differ with time. COVID, for one, brought more domestic abuse cases. Some cases continue to involve the same set of people, as abuse can often turn into a vicious cycle. Finally, teachers must report domestic abuse in minors, and while parents should report such things, it is not legally required. The next important resource for domestic abuse victims is Radnor Township social worker, Isabel Cook. Her job is to interact with victims prior to their disclosure to the police, to go over police reports and decide whether or not it's safe to talk to the victim, because each situation is different and sometimes abusers make it dangerous for the victim to be communicating with anyone. Another thing she'll do is lead victims to other helpful resources such as the Domestic Abuse Project or Delaware County Victims Assistance. Some takeaways from this interview are that as soon as safety in a relationship is a question, it's important to get help. Also, educating people about domestic abuse is important for prevention because the sooner they will be able to recognize an abusive situation and get themselves, they will be able to get themselves out of it sooner and seek help. The earlier a victim is helped, the easier it is to remove them from the situation, because the longer an abuser has a hold over the victim, the more power and control they obtain. Lastly, it is important to give victims the power to handle their situation because it is one major thing that the abusers won't let them have. Third essential resource I will be discussing is the Domestic Abuse Project. At the Domestic Abuse Project, they have many resources and ways to help victims. If a situation is lethal, police phone the project's hotline, which is available 24/7. They help victims get protection from abuse orders, which are used to prohibit the abuser from contacting the victim in any way and from having weapons. They collaborate with the district attorney's office, as well as offer counseling, both hotline and crisis counseling for victims currently experiencing abuse or short-term counseling for victims after they experience abuse. They offer safe housing, private rehousing, which helps get victims a place of their own, and relocation, which help victims move if they want a fresh start. They have civil and criminal court advocacy, which allows victims to have information on court proceedings. They perform conflict checks to make sure nobody they're helping have abusive history with each other. Finally, they have a lethality assessment program and DV 101 for the purpose of training police. Key takeaways from this interview were that the roots of domestic abuse are the desire one person has for control or power over another. Also, leaving an abuser is not easy. Victims will try and leave their abuser about 7 to 8 times before they actually go through with it, and when they do finally try and leave, it is the most dangerous time for them. Finally, the most common type of abuse in Radnor is economic abuse. Final resource I will be discussing is the Women's Resource Center. At the Women's Resource Center, they have a helpline where they connect victims to resources where they can obtain legal help, shelter, and protection from abuse orders. Some of these organizations include, depending on the victim's county, Laurel House, the Domestic Abuse Project, the Chester County Center for Domestic Violence, A Woman's Place, and more. They also offer financial and mental counseling. Key takeaways are that while the law is improving in victims' favor, society still has much work to do. These are the sources I used for my presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today.
Thank you for that excellent presentation. Will you be willing to take some questions?
Sure, I'll try.
Does anybody have any questions? Well, I actually have one. Is there, this was an illuminating, informing presentation. For me, it resonated a lot because I just finished my child abuse 3 hours of continuing medical education requiring certification of my relicensing, and there's a lot of crossover there. Is there something, in coming to the Radnor Township Board of Health, is there something that you would like from the Board of Health? Is there an action item for us, or is this community education?
This is education.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It's always excellent when somebody can get up and give a tight, informative presentation, and we really appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really great. Thank you.
Don't forget your stuff, and you are welcome to stay. You're as part of the public of Radnor Township. You're welcome to stay, and you don't have to feel compelled to. So we have next on our agenda is our organizational issues, and there are a couple of those. I was just informed at the beginning of the meeting that we have one of our vacant spots on the board will be filled for the next meeting with an individual with a really impressive CV. Is that you? That's me. Excellent. Well, since you're here, would you like to introduce yourself now, since you're here, to the board?
I can, sure.
That would be wonderful.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Barbara Fulton. I am a nurse practitioner, and I've been in healthcare for 30-plus years. I, right now, am the lead clinician at Bryn Mawr College and follow that community through a lot of trends. Right now, of course, we're seeing a lot of pneumonia and things. Happy to, I've lived in the township myself all my life, which is 60 years, and I really look forward to helping out and working with the board
We're
to
thrilled to have you.
troubleshoot. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. We have Jenny, who represents the school district, which is critically important, I think, for us as the board to understand with regard to what's going on in the township. But there are a lot of people who are not within the school district who represent populations that, let's just be frank, are hotbeds of disease, including the colleges and universities. And so having another set of eyes and ears is really, really helpful. Look forward to you joining.
Thank you so much.
The other organizational issue is that in January we will need to have elections again. And I feel terribly guilty, and I apologize, but my personal life precludes my being able to be here. So I'll ask Chloe, as our vice chair, to run the meeting, and it will be like we have done twice already, which is you will bring the meeting to order and initiate the election process. I really want to ask everybody to think about this and to consider stepping up for leadership roles. I'm sorry, I just can't do it anymore, and we need to bring along next generation of leadership. So Maggie will assist, and we'll ask Maggie and Chloe to run that next meeting. And before I'm out for only about a week or so, but you and I can work offline to assure that you have that under control. All right? And that is what I have for organizational issues. And next on the agenda is student intern program. Lisa and apparently also Alice are unavailable, so let's just ask Hannah for an update on her program.
Excuse me, before we go to that, can I just ask
Of
a
course, I'm sorry.
procedural question? I apologize, Hannah. So, we've talked about the need for elections for a couple of different meetings, and I'm not 100% sure if we know, sort of where we're headed with it. And I'm just wondering to what extent we're allowed to talk about it in between our meetings so we can plan and sort of as a board kind of have a plan for this, at least to know who's interested in what, rather than, I'm a little concerned about waiting a month and then coming here without at least knowing that we have people that are interested and what might happen.
So there's nothing, and Maggie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's nothing that precludes you from talking with other individual board members between meetings. An issue might arise when the communication is durable, but there's actually nothing that prevents two individuals in the board or several individuals in the board from communicating with each other by email, by snail mail, certainly by voice. The issue becomes when 5 of the members communicate together. That becomes a quorum. It becomes an unannounced meeting, and it is actually publicly disclosable, and it is against the rules to have those meetings without pre-public information and sharing with the public. So there is nothing that keeps you as an individual to speak with your other colleagues, to explore the willingness of colleagues to either accept a nomination should you want to nominate them, or to nominate you. And there is nothing wrong with asking somebody if you would like to be nominated to nominate as part of that process.
I think I understand the rules that you mentioned, and I don't think that the discussion that I would recommend that we have should need to be private. I mean, if we were to say that we were going to have, even if it was like a Zoom meeting in between, and just announce that we're going to do it, I don't know whether anyone else would join other than our board. I mean, I just think there's probably going to be benefit to having discussion and planning prior to a month from now. And I don't know whether anyone, I don't know, and maybe it's a little unorthodox, but I just, if we declared that we're going to do it and we made it available for people to join to have the discussion, Is there an issue with doing that?
So what I'm not understanding is, why do we need an extra meeting? If you have issues that you want to talk about for the election, we can certainly raise them now. There's no reason why we can't have that discussion now. And if you wanted to have another meeting, I'm not sure I understand. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't understand what the agenda would be and what you would be trying to cover. I mean, we have to have an election. We need a new chairman. We've got a new chairperson, but that seat will also have to be filled. And if you have things that you want to bring forward now, that's fine. And if you want to put together an agenda for a Zoom in between, I don't think there's any reason why we couldn't have that as long as we make the proceedings public. Is that right?
I don't have a topic for discussion other than what I was saying, that I feel that probably we need to arrange to have a discussion where we're going to just talk about it, because I feel like we've gone for months with this issue, literally for months with this issue in the air, and I'm not sure what has happened to resolve it, and I'm not sure what's going to happen to resolve it before the next one. So rather than have another time when we're not quite sure where it's going to go, I think it would be good for the board to think about it and have discussion. But I realize that this would be an opportunity to do that. I'm just not sure with me calling the question right now whether people are prepared for that. I also don't know, since we don't have a number of the board members, whether now's the best time to have the discussion.
What action item do you propose out of this? I was kind of hoping, it might have been a pipe dream, I was kind of hoping that me not being in the room would compel somebody to step forward and take the yoke of responsibility. My sense is that doesn't necessarily require a meeting, but it might. And so I'm a little, I don't know where to go with this. I'm looking to you to push what direction this should go.
From my perspective, I think if people know that we're going to have a meeting to discuss this, the past, current, and prior and future leadership, and we want to encourage people to plan with us and figure out who might be interested, and actually have a meeting where we discuss that. It just feels to me like that process may be beneficial, so that what we wind up with isn't spur of the moment. I don't think it would be spur of the moment for lack of your attempts. I think it's just that we haven't really had the discussion about what's going on and what are people's concerns about stepping forward or not stepping forward. So it's just my suggestion. I'm kind of big on process, and I feel like, if we declare a time and space that we're going to talk about it and work it out, at least to have a plan going into the January meeting, I feel like that might be, it might help us get to a successful spot.
I think the Zoom meeting would be good just to know where we'll be at for January.
So I don't have any problem. I will tell you that in my experience in organizing meetings, the most painful moment of any meeting is when you ask somebody to take out their calendar. One of the most challenging things for us to do is to get time and space where people are actually available. To be frank, I'm not willing to do this. I'm not at all resistant to the notion of doing it, but somebody else is going to have to take the responsibility for getting a time. I'm sure Ian can set the Zoom up. We need to make sure that we're compliant. I think that it is complicated by the fact that we are very, very close to Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and the New Year, and that will make it more challenging. But I think I don't see any reason why an hour Zoom is going to be a problem. I think the problem is going to be which hour will that Zoom occur.
Is the issue with discussing it now that we're missing some members? Is that the issue?
Say again?
Is that we're missing some members right now?
No, I think yeah, I think what I heard from Seth is that with Lisa absent, Kiki barely hanging on, Julie not here, Bob Desidue not here, that that, and our new member not yet incorporated into the board, that there's really not a lot that will happen if we discuss it now, and that you need a little bit more representation. That's what I heard you say.
Yes, and you know, my comments are also, it's everything that was just said, but my comments are also based on not knowing exactly where folks stand, because we've talked about the need for new leadership for a number of months, and I don't know exactly who's going to provide that new leadership. So to me, you know, it may be that one of us is planning on, you know, asking to be nominated or accepting the nomination, and that would be wonderful. But if I don't have that information, and I in my experience, you know, my level of comfort is to say let's plan ahead and try to have a conversation so we have a good idea what's going to happen going into the meeting.
All right, well, here's what I would suggest. I'll step back to have the two of you forward as agreeing to get together. I think I do have experience in doing this. I think that the best thing to do this would be to choose 3 one-hour time slots, send it out to everybody, ask everybody to prioritize those time slots with an impossible or 1, 2, 3, and then see if you can't find a time slot. My advice would be anytime after January 1st, before the next meeting, and that you then make it clear that the agenda of the meeting is to discuss how we are going to bring forward new leadership for the board. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
So
Thank
you
you.
two have an action item and I don't.
I'm happy to facilitate the Zoom part of it and getting Ian and, you know, announcing it as a public meeting. So the earlier I could know that date, the better.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
But I think the requirement is a week, basically, so.
Right, posting for I think I think it's a really good idea, Seth. I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you're willing to lead on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. My thought would be to make sure everybody knows within the next week or so that this is what we want to do, and in so doing, ask them to, you know, we'll have to figure out a way to pick some dates. But in that same request, make sure everyone knows, and we want everyone to come and want everyone to think about it. And then hopefully we'll be nice and prepared for that discussion, which will really set us up well for January.
Excellent. I'm not being rude here. I've got an obligation as we move forward. I'm trying to pull it up. So I think with that, we can move on from organizational issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
And no, thank you. And go back to the student intern program.
I am continuing my research on the importance of school lunch nutrition for high school students, focusing on its impact on overall health and academic performance. And I am currently analyzing the nutritional value of school lunches across schools in America. And in particular, I hope to examine how the quality and variety of food offering in Radnor School specifically align with recommended dietary guidelines for teenagers. And additionally, I'm going to explore student attitudes towards school lunches options and how those perceptions might influence their dietary choices. And this research will hopefully identify areas for improvement and inform recommendations for healthier, more balanced school lunch programs for Radnor schools, specifically Radnor High School.
Excellent, thanks. Anybody have questions?
Are you going to look at anything other than lunch, or simply like the breakfast programs? And I know there's a lot of data out there about good nutrition and starting off right, and I didn't know if you were going to address that or not.
I was going to have like an interview session with hopefully some of the lunch ladies sometime in January after we get back from the holidays, so I could ask questions definitely about the breakfast program as well as the lunch program.
Well, thanks. I'm actually pretty excited. I think that I was all on board when I heard that was what you wanted to do before we decided, and I think it has a real potential to have positive impact. I'm looking forward to it, and thanks. Now you're stuck with me for a little bit. A community infectious diseases update. this meeting falling as it does between the Thanksgiving travel and the upcoming travel is a fraught time for all community transmissible diseases. Right now, we're actually in a pretty good situation. The CDC's summary is that as of December 13th, the amount of acute respiratory illness causing people to seek health care is moderate nationally, which is actually not bad for the middle of December. COVID-19 has been low since things fell off from the summer peak. The whole middle of the country, though, has had an increase to above the 5% threshold in percent positivity of ER visits, but there's not been an uptick in wastewater. But I would be astounded if the two big travel periods that we're having do not result in significant levels of infection. What I do not have a great sense of is there are an array of new, always more infectious variants, but not only are the more infectious variants more infectious, they also appear to be less virulent, and most, I shouldn't say most, the overwhelming majority of the morbidity and mortality is falling as a burden on people over 75. About 80% of that burden is there. And the issue, I think, with the travel in this time of year, travel all the time is a source of transmission, is the commingling of age groups with different levels of probability of contact and risk. And I would just have people be aware of that. RSV activity is actually the one that is bumping up the fastest, although I'm not really aware of anything local that would suggest that we have an outbreak locally. On a national level, it is bumping up. Flu continues to increase gradually. We do not yet have a flu peak, which is actually a bit of an unusual year. They are not, the strains are not unusual strains. The levels are higher. They've gone from very low to low in most of the country and to moderate in other parts of the country, Pennsylvania being moderate. It does appear that inoculation is covering the major strains. We do have strong antivirals, and for people who are at risk of significant progression, having an idea of how you would access antivirals where you'd be unfortunate enough to become infected with flu is important. I will take a moment to point out that hand washing, self-isolating if you are at significant risk and you know that you are going to put yourself in a risky situation. I want to go back to something that has been politically fraught. I can flat-footedly say masks don't work, masks do work. Masks that are of the appropriate filtering capacity for the disease that you're trying to prevent, that are worn properly, absolutely work. Let me just ask you, if you know that you're going to sit in a 10 by 10 room across the way from somebody who has influenza, RSV, or flu, influenza, RSV, or COVID, I would think that you would be a fool not to put a well-fitting N95 mask on. I think that if you went to the surgeon and you asked the surgeon not to wear a mask, you would be a fool as well. The problem that we have is that it is a group and public behavior, and masking is done in this country altogether. But again, it comes back to both with regard to the decision for inoculation and the decision for traveling and gathering. If you have a significant high risk, wearing a mask is of benefit, and the most beneficial masks are well-fitting N95s. So I think that that's all I want to talk about, with the exception of an update on public health in general. And I'm going to impose myself on you again, perhaps for the last time, and just have a discussion of inoculation. The notion that there is no safe and effective vaccine is just patently wrong and dangerous. And I just want to go down a list. In 1796, smallpox vaccine came out, and smallpox has been nearly eliminated, although it was the scourge of all of the armies of all of the countries of Europe and the Americas before the start of the 19th century. A rabies vaccine was invented in 1885, and before the vaccine, nearly every infected individual died of rabies. And now, death from rabies among humans is rare. Tetanus immunization started in 1890. It was a severe illness with 10% fatality. I can tell you that as of today, no American veteran has ever contacted tetanus. And that just tells you about both the safety and the efficacy of the tetanus vaccine. Typhoid. 81,000 Civil War soldiers died of typhoid. Tuberculosis, we don't have time to talk about. Diphtheria. In World War II, there were 1 million cases of diphtheria with 50,000 deaths. Pertussis, we discussed the last time. There were 10,000 pertussis deaths a year until pertussis became generally available in the 1950s, although the first vaccine was developed in 1926. Yellow fever is not predominantly a vaccine-related, nor is typhoid a vaccine-related, but public health and water control of water infection have, in the opinion of most people who have studied this, contributed to significant increases in longevity in all of the civilized countries of the world. We don't need to talk about influenza anymore. Polio was a nearly obliterated disease as a consequence of polio vaccines, and I think one of the problems we have is nobody out there who's talking about it has ever seen a case of polio. And with that, we've talked about measles until I'm blue in the face, but I just think that vaccines are a little bit like masks. None of them work and all of them work. None of them work for something that they're not designed for. None of them work in populations for which they're not approved, and they're not safe in populations in which they haven't been studied or approved. But virtually all of our vaccines have been studied, and for the populations for which they have indication and in which they're approved, safety and efficacy of vaccines is unquestioned and undoubted. And for our new member, Barbie, we one of the last meetings of last year, we had a public participation in which there was a litany of anti-vax disinformation provided. So I've just felt it's been an obligation for me on a regular basis to come back and talk about it. Remembering that I think that the Board of Health should be driven by science, but that public health is not science, it's policy. So that might be the last time that I impose myself on you guys in this regard. But I just think it's really important looking at what we have coming at us. And that's the end of my community infectious diseases update. Anybody want to challenge, comment, question, anything I've just said? Taking silence as a no. The next obligation I have is for Kiki for me to present the details of, so we had the fellow from Savage Sisters here in the last meeting, and we concluded that we would generate another public session for Savage Sisters in terms of community information on addiction, addictive behaviors, and prevention and treatment. And Adam Al-Assad have decided that a community information session would work to allow for enough time to market the event. The event will be here in the Radnor room following the February 18th Board of Health meeting. So it's a February 18th date, and Kiki continues to be the lead for the Board of Health on that. And that's my only old business update. Anybody else have old business updates? I guess the elections are old business, but they're new business as well, and we're done with that.
I apologize if I took that out of order.
Not at all. No, not at all. I think it was organizational issue. I think it's fine. And that brings us to new business, and we have our esteemed fearless leader of the Board of Commissioners, Maggie, to update us on anything from the Board of Commissioners that we might need to know.
Well, unless budget is related to public health, not really, but we do have a new budget for Radnor Township for next year. I'm sorry to say your taxes will be going up 2%, but it's a lot better than the county. Otherwise, that's pretty much all we've done. land development and budget.
A school district update?
So the school district update, I'll just piggyback on what our new board member talked about. I did reach out to Maureen Lorario, and she is our liaison for all of our school nurses in the district. And what she has told me is the nurses are seeing pneumonia and stomach bugs and the typical cough and colds and upper respiratory infections. But they are noticing that there just is not as much COVID as they have seen in the past. So that's one good note. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I see that Nicole has left, her presentation was really something, and she mentioned 3 different resources that we had at our partners meeting in November. I think I had talked about it in October. In November, we held our partners meeting, and our partners meeting at the district is where I invite all of our school nurses, our special education teachers, the counselors district-wide, the English language teachers, and building administrators to meet with community members. And the community members that would attend were a couple of them that she talked about. One was the police with the social worker. We call that the community support unit. We also had the local mental health professionals, child welfare, the Women's Resource Center was there. We had the Department of Human Services, the Housing Opportunities Program for Equity, which is HOPE, Karen Foundation, Truancy Prevention Specialists were there, the CYS Educational Liaison, the Domestic Abuse Project was there as well. And what we do, it's a half-a-day training, and we all are in a room, and we decided that we would focus the training that we provided on mandated reporting, because that kind of goes, you know, we work together on those with our community members, but we bring them there to get trained, and we had someone come from the state to provide the training. But what it really does is it allows us to meet each other face-to-face, have those conversations, and we give an opportunity for all of our community members to stand and let our school personnel know who they are and how they help our families in the community. And this has been done in Radnor now. I know it's been at least a decade, but I think it's been as many as 14 years. This has been put on by our social workers, and it just continues to grow. This was our largest year. We had over 100 people at our meeting this November, and it's a very it's a fun event, and it's really great to see everyone. And after a few years, some of the faces remain the same, but especially in the mental health and the clinic side, we notice that there's a lot of turnover. So it's great to have this every year so we continue to meet the new people that are providing the services to our families in this area, in this township. So that's kind of the school's update.
Thanks. That's actually really, it's good to hear. In fact, you kind of tweaked my memory when you mentioned mandated reporting was this year's topic, because I think everybody in the room, except for the youngsters in the room, are actually mandated reporters, and that one of the forms of domestic abuse is child abuse, and that any of us that saw anything that we even thought was suspicious have the obligation to, through Childline, to report that. We are all mandated reporters. So I'm glad you triggered me to remember to say that. So thank you, Jenny. I don't have any more updates. I don't know if anybody else has any more updates. I don't see anybody in the room who has public participation, unless your son has an issue for us. Okay. No issues for the board? Okay, great. Well, with that, I think I'd like to ask for a call for adjournment.
Second.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.